The famous businessman, Mikhail Khodorkovskiy, former owner of the Yukos oil company, spent 10 years in prison for tax evasion and fraud. On December the 20th, 2013, he was released. After that, he left Russia. Now, the name of Khodorkovskiy is still controversial. Some consider him a crook, and it's right that he was imprisoned. Others think of him as a persecuted, honest businessman. Allegedly, he was simply wanted to be deprived of his wealth, which he had honestly earned. Now, Khodorkovskiy is free, so it's time to figure this out. Who is he really? How did he earn his millions? What does he do today? And where are the billions of Yukos dividends gone? Watch further. How did the state-owned company Yukos actually end up in the hands of the oligarchs? Then it was submitted to the investment committee. See, we have completed the investment programs. And who managed to profit from the privatization of an oil company? Didn't you help him buy Yukos? Where did you read it? How much money did Khodorkovskiy's team earn on Russian oil, and how much did they steal? $51 billion were withdrawn. Where are the top managers of Yukos hiding now? I would like to talk to Mr. Nevzlin. How does Khodorkovskiy's team buy tens of thousands of square meters of real estate around the world, and why is it hiding its new business empire? Where is Khodorkovskiy himself hiding now?
If you come in, he have to call us, and he said, my friend is coming.
Only here we have unique documents collected by investigators in the new Yukos case, the third in a row. Secret agreements and secret deals. Where are the tens of billions of dollars illegally withdrawn from the oil company gone? And where are they to be looked for now? For the first time on the screens, the true story of one of the richest people in Russia of the 2000s and his oil empire. Rublesko Highway, Zhukova Village, a famous rich man's community. The owners of the Yukos oil company once lived here. However, this information was never advertised. The image of the oligarchs from the Rublevka worked poorly on the image of Yukos, people with progressive views. Here it is, Apple Garden, a gated community built in Zhukova specifically for Yukos shareholders. In this protected area of 22 hectares, there are 7 cottages in which they lived with their families. In this house, Khodorkovskiy lived himself, and in the others, the closest associates and co-owners of Yukos. Let us recall their names. Platon Lebedev, Khodorkovskiy's business partner since 1987. A former co-owner of Yukos, for fraud and tax evasion, he spent more than 10 years in prison. Leonid Nevzlin is the right hand of Khodorkovskiy, a former co-owner of Yukos, wanted. Mikhail Brudno is a former co-owner of Yukos, wanted. Vladimir Dubov is a former co-owner of Yukos, wanted. Now, most of the owners of the gated community are hiding abroad, and Apple Garden is let out for rent. On the internet, you can find such ads as this. 3 houses with the area of 500, 700 and 900 square meters are let out for rent. In each of them, there are at least 3 bedrooms. There's also a spa zone with a pool and rooms with a fireplace. The cost of renting one such house is 800,000 rubles per month. Now, despite the high price, there is not a single vacant cottage in the community. The Rublesko real estate still brings its owners a considerable income. This 3-story Georgian-style building, the so-called Yukos Reception House, was previously used for business meetings. It was here, as the investigation would later establish, where the major shareholders of Yukos planned their crimes. Now this house is rented, the English Castle, as it is called here. It can be rented for a wedding or a corporate party. There is a fireplace room, lounge bar, billiard room and a cigar room. To rent this spacious mansion for a day with an area of 4,000 square meters, you must pay at least 500,000 rubles. By the way, some of Khodorkovskiy's former companions can still be found here. In this footage, Khodorkovskiy's former partner, Platon Lebedev, after being released from prison, accompanied by a guard, visits the Apple Garden community. Khodorkovskiy did not sell his house in Rublevka, but the famous yacht Constellation, which was built specifically for him, is said to go from hand to hand. The Snow White 90-metre ship, which was later renamed as Laura L, is still amongst the largest yachts of our time. Mikhail Khodorkovskiy, the former owner of this yacht, now lives in London. In the West, he is known as one of the sponsors of the Russian opposition. But this is probably all that is known about him officially. Where exactly he lives and how he earns his living. Even his supporters don't know about it. And almost nothing is known about the other shareholders of UKUS, as if they'd never existed at all. The scandalous UKUS dissolved, as well as its billions. I'll read that again. Huge billions of dollars that had been earned by UKUS were taken abroad at that time and placed in offshore and other businesses that are still controlled by Khodorkovskiy. For many years, Interpol had unsuccessfully tried to find out the location of Khodorkovskiy's main partner, Leonid Nevzlin, but failed to do it. In the hierarchy inside UKUS, Nevzlin was actually the second man after Khodorkovskiy, his right hand. At that time, he controlled the power unit. Nevzlin was convicted in the Russian Federation in absentia for life imprisonment, contract killings, attempted murders, etc. Is it really so difficult to find the former owners of UKUS for the law enforcement bodies? We began our investigation in Israel not by chance. It was here, as the Israeli press wrote, where the former UKUS shareholders, Leonid Nevzlin, Mikhail and Vladimir Dubov, fled to right after the arrest of Mikhail Khodorkovskiy. We had one clue. According to the data of our law enforcement bodies, Nevzlin's apartment is located near Tel Aviv in the town of Hazilah. Here, on the shores of the Mediterranean, very wealthy citizens of Israel who should be bothered by anyone live. A lot of Russians live in this area. Someone may recognize Khodorkovskiy's partner by the photo. No one here will say anything to you. This is Israel. But why? Just because there are no fools here. Where is Nevzlin? Who can have several houses on every street in Hazilah to be looked for? Well, and how to find a person whom the Russian law enforcement bodies have been trying to track down for over 50 years. Suddenly, one of the locals recognized his neighbor in a man on the photos. The number of guards and all kinds of assistants who came out to meet us left no doubt here lives somebody very important. Our arrival was immediately reported, and then it was unequivocally made clear that we'd better leave. Hello, do you speak Russian? We speak Russian. Fine. I'd like to talk to Mr. Nevzlin. He lives here. This is not up to me. I want to know why he's hiding from Russian justice.
So go to the other side and I'll talk to you because I'm going to order for you a policeman.
With the help of a quadcopter, we were able to see the lot of Leonid Nevzlin. Here there are two houses joined by a garage zone. The roof on one of these houses is equipped for a summer terrace. Downstairs you can see a pond, swimming pool, gazebo, summer kitchen, dining area and a place to relax. Each of the houses has 3 floors. The lot is guarded around the clock. As soon as they saw there was aerial photography in progress, the security officers got into the cars and began searching for the drone operator. We managed to find out that another business partner of Khodorkovskiy, Mikhail, also lives in Hazilah, despite the fact that the Russian enforcement bodies are looking for him for stealing more than $7 billion. Brudno still freely moves around the world. Here he is in Georgia, here he is at his own summer cottage in Lithuania, and here traveling with his wife in the United States. Here we are, going by bus in California. What's our route today? Las Vegas to San Francisco. Yes! Here I am to shoot it. And Brudno is travelling in a special mobile home for the rich, a luxurious Integra Aspire. In Israel, this former shareholder of UKUS tried to build a business in the fitness industry for 50 million shekels, and this is as much as 850 million rubles. Brudno bought 400 square meters in the G-City shopping complex. There he put in new machines, solariums, built a pool. However, the business did not go. The other shareholder of UKUS, Vladimir Dubov, had developed slightly better commercial skills. Dubov bought a winery in northern Israel in the Kerem Maharal region. There he produces wine under the brand name of Amphore. The present owners, Vladimir Dubov and Dr. Yuvslin, a veterinarian. The average price for a bottle is several thousand rubles. There are ones for over 20 to 30,000. Dubov, as well as other shareholders of UKUS, is carefully hiding his location. In Russia, he is being wanted for the theft of 76 million rubles from the budget. The runaway businessman is in the Kafir Shamara district next to Hazilah, and according to some information, he owns this house. this is the UK. Finding someone who is hiding himself in this country is as difficult as in Israel. England seldom extradites our runaways to Russia, so here they feel completely protected. London has become a home for UKAS's main shareholder, Mikhail Khodorkovskiy, as we managed to find out here. In 67 Wimpole Street, there is Khodorkovskiy's office. Here he, as a rule, receives all his guests. Here he also has the headquarters of the Open Russia organisation, which is banned in Russia.
Private residence. I don't think you have permission to film a particular house.
I understand.
You understand?
So, Khodorkovskiy, despite the apparent openness, Mikhail Berezovsky is a very closed businessman. All his publicity is a project run by his managers, and they are well paid. The real Khodorkovskiy is known by very few people. And only one person knows everything about him, Salavat Karimov, the senior investigator of the Prosecutor General's Office of the Russian Federation. It was he who in 2003 headed the investigative group on UKAS, which brought 2 criminal cases to court. Since then, hundreds of witnesses have been interviewed, dozens of volumes of evidence have also been collected. Several high-ranking UKAS top managers, including Mikhail Khodorkovskiy, went to jail in connection with the case of tax evasion and on the facts of numerous frauds. Several years ago, the Prosecutor General's Office of Russia launched a new large-scale investigation in relation to the former owners of UKAS. New sensational circumstances have been revealed. According to the investigators, at the start of this business, Khodorkovskiy, along with his accomplices, seized the oil company as a result of a carefully planned fraud. And this means that almost everything that Khodorkovskiy and his former partners own today was acquired in a criminal way. Here, it is absolutely proved that he owns the shares illegally, that he brings the profits to offshore. Salavat Karimov is one of the most experienced detectives in the country. He has been in the service for almost 40 years. His track record includes high-profile investigations against such oligarchs as Badri Patakachli, Vladimir Gusinki and Boris Berezovsky. The press even dubbed him as the killer of the oligarchs. Today, a senior investigator from the General Prosecutor's Office will tell for the first time what the third criminal case on UKAS is and how, in fact, Khodorkovskiy and his team became billionaires. Khodorkovskiy is said to have been so rich that he bought UKAS for his personal savings, but it is not so. Khodorkovskiy earned his first money almost out of thin air by cashing out. At that time, the economy was thus built in the Soviet Union that any state-owned enterprises, any factories that had huge funding from the state budget, could not withdraw funds at their discretion, as it is now. In order to cash them out, these enterprises began to cooperate with these NTTMs, which began to develop on the basis of the Komsomol throughout the country. Khodorkovskiy then handed one of such NTTMs. He was then a prominent member of the Komsomol. Accordingly, by these memories, 30% was the rate he charged. In fact, in a short period of time, through cashing and other certain muddy schemes, he made his first fortune. Here is such a simple secret to become a millionaire at public expense. Then the young oligarch gathered his own team, which included the most reliable executors of Khodorkovskiy's commercial assignments. Komsomol member Leonid Nevzlin, software engineer Mikhail Brudno, and chemist Vladimir Dubov. When the authorities shut down the scheme of cashing out, the young people who by that moment had already acquired useful contacts opened a private bank, Menatep. The main purpose of the new structure was rumoured to withdraw funds from the state-owned banks to the private sector. There we saw the Chernobyl money in the bank, and we saw that there was money for foreign economic activity, and even for arms exports too. Part of the money passed through Menatep Bank, which made it possible to make money very quickly on these state cash flows. There was so much money that a nimble businessman bought more than 100 factories and plants all over Russia. Over time, it became increasingly difficult to control such a number of assets, and then Khodorkovskiy makes a decision to concentrate his efforts on one very profitable asset, the state company UKAS. It is true that Khodorkovskiy's team didn't plan to spend all their millions on the purchase of this expensive company. They wanted to get UKAS for free, and for this they needed accomplices. This is Sergei Moravelenko, a former Communist Party deputy and one of the once richest people in Russia. In 2015, Moravelenko declared income in the amount of 426 million rubles. Can you imagine how rich this person is if he earns $500 million rubles a year? And the sources of earnings of the ex-deputy raised questions amongst many of the other party members. So, this very man became the first appointed state director of the UKAS company. Moravelenko, Kazakov, Ivanko, and Golubev. Khodorkovskiy guaranteed them the payment in the amount of a 15% stake in UKAS, which was equal to the market value of $2 billion US. And he actually paid several hundred millions to the accounts that were opened in offshore in the name of these top 4 managers of UKAS. To be precise, we're talking about $250 million. The former president of UKAS could tell a lot about how the state-owned company found itself in the hands of the oligarchs. Moravelenko didn't have to go to the UK or Israel. It turned out that the ex-communist lives in Rubelovka, near Barvirka. It's impossible to get there from the street just like that. This is a gated community of billionaires, a complex of elite cottages and estates, Mindorf Gardens. The average price for a house in this place is 3 billion rubles. And here, behind the high fence, in a house of 2,000 square meters, lives Sergei Moravelenko, a former UKAS top manager. Hi, I'm looking for Sergei Moravelenko. Did I come to the right address? Yes. The local guard was polite at first, but as soon as he found out why we'd come, he tried to prevent the shooting. Here, we were clearly not welcome. We did not meet Sergei, but we found his wife, who for some reason presented herself as a housekeeper. Delete the footage. Are you the wife of Sergei Viktorovich? No, I am a housekeeper. He does not pay a salary. Does not pay such a house and you're not paid a salary? We were able to find the millionaire Moravelenko only at Sharamito Airport, from where Khodorkovskiy's business partner flew to Zurich, Switzerland. We wanted to find out whether Moravelenko really had helped Khodorkovskiy to take over UKAS, and is it true that he made all his wealth thanks to the oligarch? Some time ago, you received rather big money from Mikhail Khodorkovskiy, $250 million. I have nothing to comment such a nonsense. Where did you read? Are you serious? We did not expect any other answer, and we'd read it in the UKAS case. There are letters addressed to the first Deputy Prime Minister signed by Moravelenko. In them, he is asking to concentrate the shares of UKAS in the hands of, quotation, an effective investor. According to the investigation by The Moment, the then president of the state-owned company UKAS, Sergei Moravelenko, had already agreed with the oligarchs that Mikhail Khodorkovskiy should become the only investor. And together they developed a mechanism, in fact, scrolling a real scam. They agreed on UKAS to be sold at a bargain price. A third of the company, which would cost billions, was bought for $9 million. A 33% stake of UKAS was transferred to the ownership of Khodorkovskiy's team during the investment competition, which was held in December 1995. At this tender, the team put up 2 structures under their control. ZAO Laguna and ZAO Regent, which organised the fake competition. The facts that the companies participating in the UKAS acquisitions were controlled by Khodorkovskiy are confirmed by the former partners of the oligarch. This is Alexei Golubevich, one of the owners of UKAS. UKAS was acquired by several Russian companies. Montblanc, Lagoon. These are the names that did not speak about anything then. A competition had to be participated by several companies. All of this was credited by Menatep Bank. Alexei Golubevich began working for Khodorkovskiy since 1993. In the interests of the young oligarch, he participated in dozens of deals in the takeover of state-owned companies. The experienced manager knows not by hearsay how the tender for the acquisition of 33% of UKAS actually took place. The Russian word fictitia, fiction, can have a political sense and can have the legal one. From the political point of view, of course, this was a fiction. Let us go back to the UKAS history.
менеджеры компании банка.
The managers of Menatep Bank's company persuaded the state structures,
Имущество, это РФФИ.
State Property Committee, RFBR, the government headed by Chubais, to let those who would win 33% immediately in December acquire the right to win 45%. That was a nonsense, because one first should prove that he is wealthy, that he is not cheating. To the contrary, a special provision was introduced and Laguna won another 45% of the shares.
Акции.
An important condition for both the first and the second tenders was that the winner was to make investments in the UCAS company in the amount of $150 and $200 million respectively. According to Khodorkovskiy's subordinates, not a single dollar from the agreed amount has ever been invested. The purchased enterprise opened accounts with Menatep Bank through the company that owned it. The investment funds were quickly put on the accounts of those enterprises. The payrolls were submitted to the investment committee to show that they'd carried out the investment program, and then the funds were withdrawn by different means, and so on.
Видите, выполнение инвестпрограммы. И дальше эти деньги разными способами снимались и так далее.
Gitas Analonius is a former executive director of the Russian-Swiss company Russian Trust and Trade. As a lawyer by education, he began working for Khodorkovskiy in November 1990. Gitas remembered that he was paid so well that it was possible to buy half a flat in Moscow for one monthly salary. 2 to 3, even 5 million rubles were not real money for us. Money was here and there, lying in bags under their feet. However, the tasks set for Gitas were also specific.
Очень много
Much of what we did on Khodorkovskiy's order, for example, how not to pay money to the Russian budget,
не платить, допустим, бюджет Российской Федерации денег.
the services that Gitas performed were so delicate that very soon he became an indispensable person. Over time, the duties of a lawyer was to service the entire business empire of the young oligarchs. In 1994, I probably took about 250, 300, and when it was over 500 Russian companies, about 120 to 150 foreign companies. There were textile companies, ports, Volga Tanker, Anavisma, titanium, magnesium, chemical companies, a very large list of which were purchased at certain types of competitions. According to Gitas, the funds involved in the UCAS purchase competitions were borrowed from the state, which had numerous accounts in the private bank of Khodorkovskiy. Accordingly to our interrogators, the main deposit holders were the Ministry of Finance, Vozvenseny, Tax Inspection and other state structures. At the same time, the millions taken from there did not return to the bank. This is the whole secret of the efficient managers of Khodorkovskiy. It's possible to say that UCAS was bought for public money. In 1999, Menatep Bank went bankrupt, on purpose, of course. This made it possible to write off a lot of debts to the state and other depositors of the private bank. The prosecutor's office collected all the necessary evidence confirming the fact of the misappropriation of the state-owned UCAS company by an organised criminal group led by the oligarch Mikhail Khodorkovskiy. And that's not all. Today, the investigators who have unravelled a tangle of dubious contracts say that there were a number of schemes through which Khodorkovskiy made a fortune. One of them was the sale of the so-called well fluid. Remember the glass jars with water and oil, which Khodorkovskiy's lawyers showed in court? Yeah, so under the guise of this mixture, Khodorkovskiy bought oil from UCAS's subsidiaries and sold it at the market price, but through his own firms. Now, of course, the profit went past other UCAS shareholders, with whom no one wanted to share. Let's take certain extractive companies. For example, Young. This is Jugendgas. It sells oil, for example, to Fargoil and Ratibor, which are registered. Well, let's take it 250 rubles. These sell oil to another Russian company, for example, Ratmer, for 1,000 rubles. So 750 rubles is a profit here. Ratmer then sells it to a foreign company, which also belongs to Khodorkovskiy and his group.
эта иностранная компания
The foreign company, 1,100 rubles.
уже продает за 2000.
Then it sells for 2,000 rubles to a real buyer, and here remains 900 rubles of net profit.
Вот такая вот
This is the scheme that existed.
существовала. Вот.
He earned 750 rubles here that way.
Здесь заработал.
Then he earned 900 rubles there.
Эти
And
деньги
this money
уходят
already goes to the third structure, a foreign company, which is managed by Khodorkovskiy's managers. The profit and the rest of the shareholders of UKAS could count on 250 rubles per ton. Everything else flowed into the pocket of Mikhail Khodorkovskiy and his partners. At the same time, there were quite a few other shareholders of UKAS. According to investigator Karimov, the proportion of Khodorkovskiy's people was initially 78% and 62% after an additional issue. The remaining shares were owned by the so-called minority shareholders, among which there were a lot of large foreign companies. Here is the list. Most of these companies are world famous. JP Morgan, UBS, Merrill Lynch, Barclays, Raiffeisen, Credit Suisse, Morgan Stanley.
И всю прибыль,
And the entire profit was accumulated not by UKAS itself, which owned the shares, to pay dividends, namely these companies which practically did not belong to UKAS, through Cyprus and so on.
через Кипр и так далее.
According to the investigators, through such schemes, almost all the profits of the oil company flowed past the shareholders of UKAS, who were not in the intimate circle of Khodorkovskiy. $51 billion were withdrawn. According to Karimov, Khodorkovskiy used dozens of schemes to deceive the minority shareholders, and they are all at the disposal of this investigation. The billions of dollars that Khodorkovskiy's team pulled out of UKAS had to be safely hidden. For this purpose, numerous companies have been registered in offshore zones.
Остров
Isle of
Мэн,
Man,
Ирландия,
Ireland,
Багам,
the Bahamas,
куда мы летали,
where we flew and so on.
и так далее. Дальше юристы.
Then our lawyers registered the companies for us in the Virgin Isles, the Cayman Islands.
Виргинских островах, Каймановых островах.
Every year, the offshore system became increasingly complex and confusing. Over time, the Khodorkovskiy team was replenished with this man, Stephen Curtis, a British offshore specialist. The British financier was paid very generously. There was so much money that Curtis became the owner of a personal helicopter and even a small castle in Dorset. After Khodorkovskiy's arrest, Curtis crashed in his private helicopter on the way to his castle. It is worthwhile mentioning that that day he was escorted by the people from UKAS.
по идее, по финансовой
In theory, but a corporate financial component, he had come into conflict with Nevzlin, since Nevzlin, after
поскольку не
Khodorkovskiy and Lebedev's arrest, became the main figure.
становился главной фигурой.
The investigators do not exclude that the death of Curtis could have been rigged, not without the participation of Khodorkovskiy's right-hand man, Leonid Nevzlin. However, there is no evidence of this yet. The UK has not yet provided the Russian side with a report on the death of the UKAS top manager. Officially, Nevzlin has been charged with the murder of 3 people. How many of them there have actually been, no one knows. The killing for the prosperity of their business is a special set of the actions of UKAS. It is generally accepted that the tasks for the killers were exclusively set by UKAS's vice president, Leonid Nevzlin, while Khodorkovskiy himself stood aside. However, the testimony of the Volgograd gangster Gennady Tizernik speaks completely about something else. So the killer describes the background to the murder of Vladimir Petyov, the mayor of Netligansk. The document is published for the first time here. The purpose of the trip to Petyukov was to pay the debt in the amount of $100 million. I was asked a question: what if we killed Petyukov? At which S.V. Gorin, after consulting with A.V. and A.L. Nevzlin, said it was not the worst option. The testimony doesn't suggest what debt it was, but apparently it was not possible to reach an agreement with Petyukov. The mayor of Netligansk was liquidated on Khodorkovskiy's birthday. For this murder, Teslnik received $10,000. After the task was successfully completed, the killer was assigned another case, the murder of the manager of the Austrian company East Petroleum Handels, Evgeny Orybin. How this businessman had offended the leadership of UKAS was not explained to Teslnik, but this time he was given twice as much, $20,000. From S.V. Gorin and V.V. Shapiro, I learned that the customer of the murder of V.A. Petrikov and the organisation of the attempted murder of E.L. Rybin was the head of Yukos Oil Company, M.B. Khodorkovskiy. The fact that Mikhail Khodorkovskiy personally sentenced him to death is confirmed by the businessman Evgeny Rybin himself. He'd been attempted 3 times. At first, the killer tried to shoot him with a machine gun. The entrepreneur, by chance, survived. A tissue caught on the muzzle of the machine gun, and it gave me some seconds to figure out what to do and to survive. The cause of the conflict was the reluctance of the Yukos shareholders to pay a penalty in the amount of $100 million to the businessman for the broken contracts with his company. A savage decision was made. Let's kill Rybin. And those owners who come from abroad once or twice a year, they will not go here because they will be frightened. That was the calculation. Rybin recalls how, after the first attempt, he wanted to meet with Khodorkovskiy and discuss the possibility of settling the conflict. It became possible at the celebration of the Oilmen's Day in the Kremlin. I was standing with Mr. Overlishy, First Deputy Minister. Suddenly, Khodorkovskiy entered, passed to the central table where I was. He noticed me, suddenly went right into the crowd, and there he dissolved. There was only one exit. I wanted to tell him as he would go out, Misha, let's talk. You are hiding from me as a decrepit woman. And on the other side, there was a door to the kitchen, from where champagne and snacks came from. So he ran away through the kitchen. The second attempt happened 3 months later. Rybin's car was fired from a grenade launcher. The driver was killed. After this attempt, Rybin publicly accused Khodorkovskiy of involvement in the assassination attempts and left Russia. The businessman was hiding in Slovakia, occasionally visiting Austria. There, the killers were going to get him for the 3rd time. They were to rent a car in Germany, come to Austria and shoot me when I would leave the courthouse. I should have been killed with a crossbow so as not to produce much noise. For months and years, Rybin had waited for the investigation to produce results. Regularly, he supplied the law enforcement bodies with information he had dug out, and only then he found out why the case could not get off the ground. From the very first hours of work, the investigation team faced an unprecedented opposition. At the time of the shooting, the bullets hit the window of the house and there were 2 holes in the corner. In the morning, the glass was replaced and naturally there were no holes, no bullets were taken from the spot, no sleeves were taken. They were not even looked for. The ones which had been found were then lost. And this is not the most blatant. After the second attempt on Rybin, a grenade launcher also disappeared from the storage of evidence. This is an important material evidence from which the police officers were finished off at the Khodorkovskiy cemetery. It had been used for shooting, blowing up Rybin, and this grenade launcher disappeared. Hiding important evidence, pressurizing witnesses, the oil giant security service was not idle. They worked professionals, recent law enforcement officers and intelligence agents. The group of the so-called division of Yukos was crammed with former Secret Service agents. And the former ones were in contact with the active. Therefore, all our assignments were known to Yukos. According to the witnesses, the killings had accompanied the activities of Khodorkovskiy and his partners for many years. When Khodorkovskiy's team came to the famous mansion on Kolpachny Lane, the people working there were not treated politely. There were officers that were engaged in petty trading, and the neighbour from below said, "Why am I going to move? Why, actually? Here I have a contract." Well, that's all. In one night, they were just liquidated, and that's all. One was just stabbed. They didn't even shoot him, as it was usual then, but they simply ripped his belly, and the second was shot. I still do not fit that this intelligence face, then with a moustache and now in a very velvety voice, talking about decency and mercy. The man whose hands are in the blood up to his elbows. And when I see him on TV, I start shuddering. In the early 2000s, the UKUS methods changed. Khodorkovskiy decides to go into the big politics and to become at least the Prime Minister and maybe even the President. Fearing that the toxic UKUS might pull him to the bottom, the richest man of Russia decided to sell UKUS. The first contender for the Russian oil was the world's largest energy company, Chevron. The negotiations lasted several months, but suddenly the deal fell through. The reason is this secret report. The content of the document is published here for the first time. The report was published by the international audit company KPMG, which on the order of Chevron checked UKUS on the eve of the transaction. To the attention of Sam Ladlow. Sam Ladlow, at the time, was the vice president of Chevron Texaco. Please note that the auditors were so afraid of a leak that instead of the abbreviation UKUS, they used the letters YU. The letter S was for Sibneft, which was also the subject of a study of potential buyers. Some detailed information requested by us was not provided. In particular, not all the detailed information on costs and cash flows. Both the S and YU companies have a complex group structure, which includes several hundreds of organisations. None of these companies disclosed to us the information about their legal structure. We have a concern that in the case of acquaintance with the full table schemes of legal owners, additional questions may arise that may be relevant for your assessment of this transaction. The YU does not have a single corporate-wide financial and management accounting and reporting system. In the course of our audit, due diligence, we have received extremely limited access to the important tax documents and employees of the S and YU companies. The risk of additional taxes for the past periods is significant. The amount of tax savings, the legality of which can be challenged, exceeds $1 billion. And in the worst-case scenario, the additional tax liabilities may be about 3 to 5 billion US dollars. KPMG concluded that it was an unreliable, non-transparent company that posed a danger to the future investor. Of course, after such a devastating report, there could be no question of any deal with UKUS. The KPMG analysts were predictive. 6 months later, the head of the oil company would be arrested at the airport of Novosibirsk on suspicion of tax crimes. Lawyer Dmitry Golubov worked for Khodorkovskiy's team for over 9 years. After the arrests of the top managers of the oil giant, he moved to London. Now he is helping numerous UKUS shareholders to get their money back. We're talking about small shareholders whose total share is 10%. When several years ago the shareholders of the oil company began to divide the UKUS legacy of $2 billion remaining in the accounts of Dutch foundations, the so-called stichtings, it turned out that almost all the money had been taken by Khodorkovskiy's partners. The main purpose of the investigation of our law enforcement bodies is this question. Where did the rest of the UKUS money that Khodorkovskiy stole from the minority shareholders of the company disappear to? And this is no less than $51 billion. According to the investigators, a significant part of the dividends is really in the Netherlands. Only this is much more than the $2 billion about which the lawyer, Dmitry Golubov, spoke. There, only $10 billion were cut off and withdrawn at the time. Where are these $10 billion gone? Nobody knows that. A part was spent, for example, on luxury real estate. We continued our investigation and found some of the oligarch's property in London. Look, Khodorkovskiy lives in this prestigious residential complex, St Edmund's Terrace, that overlooks Regent's Park. The prices for apartments here are very, very high. The cost of a standard 3-room apartment of 240 square meters can reach up to $500 million rubles. The vigilant concierge did not let us go further than the threshold.
You come in, he have to call us, and he said, my friend is coming. So I'm expecting him 1 o'clock, and then we know when you come in and decide.
Finding the suburban real estate of Khodorkovskiy was not easy. This is the house in which the man who illegally appropriated UKUS has settled. Here, amongst the dense forests and endless fields, in the neighbourhood of the Russian oligarch live a lot of British millionaires and show business stars. By the way, it's within these walls that Mikhail seems to like to speculate about the oppression of liberals in Russia. The democratic forces can and should unite in the framework of specific actions. But all this, although very expensive real estate, is a drop in the ocean compared to where Khodorkovskiy's team actually takes billions stolen from the oil company. And this is already the newest history of UKAS, which has changed its name, but the characters are the same. There emerged a new structure called Quadrum. Through a chain of trusts in the offshore zones of the Cayman Islands, the island of Guernsey and Gibraltar, Khodorkovskiy, along with his old partners Leonid Nevslin, Gliton, Lebedev, Vladimir Dubov and Mikhail Brudno, have retained control over the money withdrawn from UKAS. And not just retained, but began to invest them in real estate around the world through a specially created company, Quadrum. Quadrum distributes this money into assets, creates companies, acquires real estate, and so they invest stolen funds and legalise them in businesses. The former UKAS management chose Southeast Asia as the first destination. Here it was possible not to explain the origin of the funds. In 2008, a 17-storey office building, Centrepoint, opened in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam. A year later, Quadrum entered into an alliance with the Vietnamese corporation, Refico. Together, they built these 100-metre towers. Only the wealthiest residents of Vietnam can buy an apartment here. Besides Vietnam, Khodorkovskiy's team moved to Mongolia and Myanmar. At the same time, for a long time, UKAS did not manage to enter the Western European market. The situation was tilted only in 2014 when Mikhail Khodorkovskiy, who was released, began to connect his contacts in the UK. In London, an office complex of 53,000 square metres in Dartmouth Street was bought for the UKAS dividends. A building in the business district of London, Soho, and 2 objects at Great Marlborough Street. Khodorkovskiy's team has not ignored the CIS countries either. There are Quadrum's assets in Georgia and in the Ukraine, but the most expensive Quadrum's assets are well beyond the Atlantic. America, the country in which you can not only lose your job but also get behind bars for having relations with the Russians, provided the Khodorkovskiy team with incredible business opportunities. The scale of the presence of Quadrum in the US real estate market is amazing. This 13-storey building in Fort Lauderdale near Miami Airport was the first Quadrum acquisition in the USA. The hotel, located very close to the sea, proved to be a win-win investment. And this is Miami Beach, the main resort of the United States. A few years ago, the people from UKAS purchased this building in the centre of the Art District Resort. Hotel Nautilus is located on the coastline. It offers 250 modern rooms furnished with leather and dark wood furniture, an outdoor swimming pool, spa, restaurants. Here's another of the assets of Khodorkovskiy's team, the Orlando Spa Hotel. The hotel is located in the resort town of Lake Buena Vista, a 5-minute walk from the world-famous Walt Disney attractions. On the 16 floors there are located 394 rooms, which, as the hotel says, are almost never empty. And this is the most ambitious Quadrum's project in Florida, which we also managed to shoot with a drone. And this is not a hotel or an office building. In 2015, in the town of Fort Myers, the company of the former shareholders of UKAS acquired 32.5 acres of land for the construction of a boarding house for the elderly, the Ama Vida Quarter. And this is by no means an analogue of poor houses or old age homes we are accustomed to. Within the complex, there are 460 places for the comfortable living off millionaires who are 55 plus. According to a former employee of Menatep, the Quadrum director Oleg Pavlov, Amavida is their first project in this segment, but clearly not the last. Chicago, the city of winds, the second most important financial centre of the United States. Not surprisingly, the Quadrum businessmen turn their attention to this. Here the company has 3 hotels. The first acquisition was this 17-storey hotel, the Godfrey Hotel Chicago, located a few blocks from the city centre. This April, the third in a row, Quadrum's Chicago hotel, Hotel Essex, opened. This is one of the most expensive projects of the company in the city. $75 million was spent on renovating the 14-story building. Next to the hotel, there is a huge 56-story tower of glass and steel, Essex on the Park. This is the tallest building in southern Michigan. The apartment building for wealthy people also belongs to Quadrum. And of course, New York, the largest city in the USA. The UCAS ex-shareholders company came in here on an imperial scale. In 2012, Quadrum bought the first 2 sites in the business district of the city. A few years later, they grew 2 hotels. And this 42-story building in Queens on Long Island, in the immediate vicinity of 3 subway lines, well, the former UCAS shareholders began to erect it in 2014 when they bought the site with a full tax exemption for 15 years. The building has an indoor pool, a fitness centre and a sports area. And this is a living building for millionaires. There used to be a parking lot here. Now it's a complex of luxury apartments. The team of Khodorkovskiy has areas which have not yet been mastered. For example, here on the embankment in the northern part of Brooklyn, the UCAS ex-shareholders bought a land plot of almost 6,000 square metres. Very soon, a glass skyscraper overlooking Manhattan may also appear here. However, the crown of Quadrum's portfolio is not the hotels and apartment complexes. A large-scale project of the company, renovation of an area in New Jersey. The former UCAS top managers acquired 130,000 square metres in the coastal zone in the heart of Jersey City. According to the development plan in this place, there will be 2,000 luxury apartments with a total area of 195,000 square metres. The inhabitants will live in 12-storey glass towers and enjoy the view of the bay. Could all these machinations, with the billions withdrawn from UCAS and invested in tens of thousands of square metres of real estate throughout the world, have really passed unnoticed by the foreign law enforcement officers? It is hard to believe in it. According to the British newspaper The Daily Telegraph, the American intelligence services have been closely watching Khodorkovskiy's team since the acquisition of UCAS. For deceiving American shareholders and for misappropriating dividends under the US laws, Khodorkovskiy could face up to 25 years in prison. But while the customer of killings and fraudster is posing himself as a victim of political persecution from Russia, in the West he's not asked uncomfortable questions. But the law enforcement agencies in our country have inconvenient questions with a full evidence base of criminal actions of the owners of the former UCAS. And we are sure that the time to ask them will come sooner or later.